So I hate to return the conversation to science education again, but I feel that, like Jefferson, the democracy and demands informed citizenship, and I'm concerned about the science teachers that you said don't know science. I'm worried that our university model is not one that rewards professors that are communicators. Can you address that? And shouldn't the incentives for people who are knowledgeable in science and engineering and mathematics, who can also communicate, shouldn't those incentives be huge? And why aren't they?
Well, yeah, I'll start. Well, I mean, since I like to communicate, I think the incentives should be gigantic. But I think, look, universities and research universities are for two things, and they're for the creation of knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge. And both of those things have to be rewarded. And that means dissemination of knowledge in a wide variety of ways, not just communicating, but also going and creating companies to produce technologies that improve society. And you see a lot of professors who have in the past been penalized by, in fact, taking their ideas and commercializing them. I think we need to, science and education work best when we reward those people who are talented at whatever they can do. And young people come up to me and say, look, I want to do what you're doing in terms of communication. How can I do it? And I generally tell them, frankly, that if they're scientists, and these are young scientists, that the best thing they can do if they're talented at science is do science. And look for every opportunity to communicate. But the better they are at their science, the more opportunities will arise for them to reach a broader audience. So I think you're absolutely right. We have to, as Richard says, we have to recognize, appreciate, and provide appropriate pay for teachers. It's essential. But not everyone. I've often said this. It's important to me that not every scientist goes out and talks to the public. There are a lot of my colleagues I want to keep away from the public. And so I think you have to balance it. I think you have to reward both.
I think it's also true that until fairly recently, scientists who were good at communicating were not well rewarded. I mean, the notorious case of Carl Sagan, who was obviously a superb communicator and a great scientist as well, as it happened. But he was denied fellowship of the National Academy of Sciences, almost certainly because of jealousy, actually. I mean, because he was popular, because he had a huge following on television and for his books, this actually counted against his election to the National Academy. And I think that's changed. I don't think that would happen anymore.
I mean, it still happens, of course. Jealousy is jealousy, but you're right. I think it has changed, and I think it's changed partly because scientists have recognized, and I know in this country, for example, the death when the superconducting super collider was killed, my community of scientists realized that one of the reasons was, well, it was our fault. We hadn't communicated why people should be willing to spend money on such esoteric, what seemingly esoteric questions. And I think scientists are realizing more and more, and it's a self-interest, but that's fine, that the health of science requires, and it should require, us to explain to the public why we're doing what we're doing, because the public is funding us. So I think there's more appreciation because of that.
Yeah.
I would just like to tie back to this gentleman's question here, and it was something that I've been wondering for a long time. A lot of people have been asserting that we are heading away from Darwinism. We are de-evolving. Those people that you see around you are educated. Those who have degrees in bachelor's, master's, above are having 1 to every 3 children. So we educate women, we bring their birth rate down. How and what implications is this going to have on our society as those who are more educated and who are expanding their horizons are having less and less children and having less and less effect on those who are having more children? I just had an argument with somebody who told me the earth is 6,000 years old and science is a conspiracy theory. I had nothing.
Okay. Do you want to touch that?
Really
I think the
it.
point, as I understood it, was that if we dissuade people from having children, and the people who don't have children are going to take over the world. I mean, people who do have children are going to take over the world, and I think that in fact that's been the policy of a number of religions, the Orthodox Jews, Catholics, Muslims on the whole. That point is to take over the world by breeding, and And I think the answer is that my own sense is that, first of all, when people tell me, you know, I'm educated and therefore, and I'm wealthy and therefore I should have more children because I can do it. It just seems to me to be incredible, an incredibly effete attitude. That they have a right and that they have a right, and somehow they can give a greater gift to the future by having children than anyone else. The wonderful thing about genetics, as far as I can see, is that from a slum in India, you can get one of the greatest mathematicians in the world, and so I just take that argument that the people who know something should have more kids as just ludicrous. Just ludicrous.
Dr. Krauss, I think your book is speaking to ultimately the answer to my question, but I'm going to ask my question anyway. So we know that the universe was created from the Big Bang. My question is, what created the Big Bang? Where did the stuff that created the Big Bang come from?
Well, I would say read my book, but more importantly, buy my book.
I'm going to.
But in any case, what is? Let me just give a 1-minute answer because it's a long question. What is remarkable is that you know, to create stuff, it sounds like you need stuff. And to create stuff, and the conservation of energy, you would think, and this is one of the arguments often used, conservation of energy means you can't start with nothing and have a universe with something. But what is amazing is when you add gravity into the mix, a miracle occurs, but a natural miracle. That gravity allows negative energy as well as positive energy configurations. And you can create, for example, 2 particles out of nothing. Now they have energy because of their rest mass. But if the gravitational field they're in is strong enough, the gravitational potential energy attracting them together is so strong and negative that the sum total of those 2 bits of energy can be precisely 0. And you can create those particles with impunity. And in fact, that happens, we think, near black holes, and in fact, it will happen in empty space. And so, in fact, to create stuff, you don't need stuff, you just need nothing, and in this case, quantum mechanics. That's the short version, but the long and much clearer version is in the book.
Thank you so much for both of you for coming. I have a question for Professor Dawkins about the role of the humanities in human affairs. You've spoken with great eloquence and persuasiveness about the value of science, and with equal eloquence and persuasiveness about the lack of value of religion. Where do you see the humanities?
By humanities, you would mean
literature, history,
study
philosophy.
of history, literature, languages, arts. I mean, immensely valuable. Some of the crowning achievements of the human species lie in the humanities. I see no problem with that at all. I'm proud to be a member of the same species as Shakespeare and Beethoven and Michelangelo. So I have no quarrel with anybody who wants to make a career out of the humanities and who wants to study them, a professor of history, professor of literature. These seem to me to be the right sort of things to be going on in a university and in a culture. I would accept, EXCEPT, I would accept theology from that. Because theology, it seems to me, unlike those other humanities that you mentioned, is not a subject at all.
Yeah, it's an embarrassment. I agree.
Yeah.
As
Jefferson said, a professor of divinity has no place in our university.
And he created a university, exactly. Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. I put out a challenge, and maybe some people here can try and match it. I've challenged theologians to give me a single example of a contribution to human knowledge that theology has provided in the last 500 years. And when I talk to major theologians, and I do, believe it or not, the answer I always get is, what do you mean by knowledge? And I point out, if I talk to a biologist or a historian or a psychologist, I get concrete answers, but they give me this epistemological... Anyway. Okay.
But I do think we need to add to that professors of theology often do extremely worthwhile things. Biblical history, biblical literary criticism, archaeology of Palestine. These are all thoroughly reputable and good things. When I said theology is not a subject at all, I meant things like the theology of the transubstantiation of the Trinity, etc. That's not a subject at all. But of course, many people who are professors of theology don't do that sort of nonsense. They do proper academic studies of biblical history and literature and so on.
And one last thing, I knew you asked Richard, but I'll jump in. I think that the thing that's really important to point out is there isn't a dichotomy between science and the humanities. They all do the same thing. They all give us a different perspective of our place in the cosmos. A good play does, a good piece of music, and so does science. And so they're all different parts of the same thing, in my opinion. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here and for taking my question. I was wondering about politics and religion. In a country where we have separation of church and state, why do we think it's okay to allow the policymakers and the politicians to use religious reasoning to guide legislation? So in something like stem cells or gay marriage, where the opponents of it will give a religious reason against it, doesn't that fly in the face of separation of church and state?
Of course it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we have a society where, the sad thing that Richard's pointed out, we have a society where we tolerate that. It seems acceptable. And people who bring up the problem are viewed as being strident or shrill. And an example which I created a few years ago, a group called Science Debate 2008, and now it's Science Debate 2012. We're trying to create a debate among the presidential candidates on issues of science and technology, which are actually relevant to the governance of. But when we tried, in fact, we came very close in 2008, but the candidates decided instead to have a debate on faith, which of course is completely irrelevant to anything that's going to matter, because they're all people of faith. But I think we need journalists to have the courage to point that out, and we need the journalists to be able to do that and still have papers that sell copies, and that's the hard part, I think. Maybe, I guess we're going to ask one more question, the last question.
I'm the lucky one, thank you. I suppose, Dr. Dawkins, I would ask this to you. Is there a scientific basis for the concept of free will in human beings? And if not, is there a biological evolutionary reason why all of us believe we have free will?
The late Christopher Hitchens, when asked, does he believe in free will, replied, I have no choice. It's a question that I dread, actually, because I don't have a very well thought out view about it. I think that, I have a materialist view of the world. I think that that things are determined in a rational way by antecedent events. And so that commits me to the view that when I think I have free will, when I think that I'm exercising free choice, I'm deluding myself, that my brain states are determined by physical events, and yet that seems to contradict, to go against the very powerful subjective impression that we all have, that we do have free will. I think all I can do is recommend the works of my colleague Daniel Dennett on the subject, which are fascinating.
And there's a new book by another one of our colleagues, Sam Harris, on free will that's coming out. But
yes.
But I also have to agree that I think everything I know about the world tells me that there's no such thing as free will. I just think we act, but the world behaves as if there's free will, and so it doesn't make much difference. Just like the particles in the room, we can discuss them statistically, and they behave as if they can do things that they're not being forced to do. It's just statistics. And we behave as if we have free will because we live in a very complex world where there's so many factors influencing any of our decisions that you can't trace that free will down to its source. And so the difference between a world where we act as if we have free will, or it looks like we have free will, and we really do, in my mind is so minimal that it's a question for philosophers to worry about, but not me. And maybe with that, we'll thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.